on live stream. Okay, welcome everyone on live stream. I'm just sorting out the board to be a bit better. Hopefully it's quite good now, but actually the board design, I'm just going to try and change the board design. Board coordinates we want, I think that's about it. Yeah, coordinates will do. Okay, so I hope that's pretty good. Can I make the board a bit bigger? Okay, now we're ready. We're going to look at Mikhal Tahl games again this week. So welcome everyone on ChessBase and on live stream. So I've got a collection of games to look at, which I've played through a bit myself beforehand. I've got some insights, but they're quite complicated games. So let's have a look at this one in Stockholm 1961, so against Wolfgang Unzicker. So Mikhal was white, he played e4, and after e5 we have the standard Royalopez, so bishop b5. After a6 bishop goes back, knight f6 castles. It's all pretty standard Royalopez so far. So d6, quite a solid variation, no Marshall Gambit, etc. Black often is in this line going to retreat the knight and then maybe play c5, c3, black castles, and after h3 now this knight retreat, which some of you may think is quite curious. It loses a bit of time to retreat the knight, but it does unblock the pawn and the knight can try and get to a better square, and c5 will clamp down on white playing d4. So there's an idea behind it. The other approach, maybe knight a5 was possible. Not totally hot on the theory here, but knight b8 is fairly standard. And also to be able to answer d4 now with this move knight bd7, so reinforcing the strong point e5 in the position. Okay, so actually I'm just going to make sure the chat windows are a bit more visible to me before proceeding. Just I don't want to miss out too many questions or anything, so I'm just rearranging my chat windows. Okay. So basically now the interesting point here, I don't know if this was a new move, but the move c4, I don't know how many of you would consider c4 here, and why would you consider it? It looks to be a bit unusual. What is going on with c4? Basically, okay, well, one point is if takes this will be a more fragmented pawn structure, be an isolated a pawn to target. So if black really is going to defend with c6, it seems there's an implication here that when black plays c6, white is really trying to clear out this diagonal for the bishop. At the moment, black's always able to play d5 if you think about it. So this operation with c4 prompting c6 starts to reveal an idea, a very, very simple idea about f7 on the diagonal actually, that to try and remove one of these pawns so d5 is not possible later. That's something I've picked up on as a theme here. Normally I think most players would just continue, I think, with the standard Royalopez type maneuvers, maybe trying to get a knight on f5. That's a normal maneuver. So this looks a bit unusual, this c4. So you'll see that this diagonal now is sort of cleared out because Mikhal plays c5, and already if d takes, you'll see that diagonal's cleared. Bishop's got the scope on the diagonal. So actually black defended with queen c7, and again one of those pawns has been knocked out now, so there's going to be no d5. The bishop's totally clear cut on f7 So that was the first kind of strategical tactical operation in this game, which seems to be offbeat actually, just from normal Royalopez moves, this c4 idea. And this is going to be a very important diagonal later on in the game. So bishop g5 is played down, so there's an immediate threat. Bishop takes and maybe d takes. These have to be parried. If d takes knight e5, then bishop f6 will fracture black's pawn structure. And black really doesn't want to give up the dark square bishop with bishop e5. So this is also a bit of a problem. But nevertheless, black does invite d takes e5, plays c5. And maybe Mikhal, he had to take the decision now that d takes e5 is not a big deal to collect the dark square bishop. Maybe, you know, black, if he gets a knight to e5 and plays c4 and bishop b7, there'll be a lot of pressure bearing down on his position. That knight will actually be quite big. So the decision here about not winning the dark square bishop has to be made. So instead, he doesn't play d takes e5, he plays d takes c5. Remember, this diagonal is kept clear now. There's no d5s from black from the earlier operation. Now, knight takes c5 would mean bishop takes f6 really does dent black's pawn structure on the king side. So bishop takes c5 is played. And now, look at that knight. It wasn't committed to knight d2, and it's going to a better square immediately by default as well. So this is another perk of that early early c4 move. The knight can go to c3 now in one move. Knight c3, where it nicely eyes d5. So d5 is a bit of a weakness. It looks as though, in fact, we're almost transposing into a sort of Sicilian type position a little bit. But actually both sides are sharing the open C and D files here. So what are the opportunities for both sides? White has control of d5 here, and this diagonal is a bit dangerous. It's probably more dangerous than this diagonal at the moment. Although the rook on e1 is not guarding f2, and the rook here is guarding f7. So you could make the case, hasn't black got pressure on the diagonal as well? Okay, bishop b7, and now the move rook c1, exposing that queen, sort of x-ray attack on the queen potentially. So that's a bit uncomfortable for players to face these like latent, attacks. So it's got out of, and more pressure is exerted on that sensitive f2 pawn. So how does white defend that? Mikhal is content to play a seemingly passive move here, rook e2, but it's dual purpose. It's not just defending f2. The rook can switch to the c file later, where it can exert pressure and may be very useful on these entry points. So it's attacking and defensive rook e2. Rook f e8 was played, so that gives potentially a square if black wants to do a knight maneuver in the future or bishop maneuver. But it does weaken f7 ever so subtly. If the other rook had been used, then the rook would be there, but it would be sort of hemmed in, wouldn't it? If you play the other rook to e8, you're sort of hemming in that rook. So it feels a little bit more natural to play, this rook move. It seems natural to reinforce the e5 point. Now comes the move knight d5, which Mikhal is wanting to keep a peace outpost on d5 actually. So after bishop d5 he plays bishop d5, and it doesn't matter actually if it's the queen here. Knight takes, I think he would play queen takes d5, and there'll be annoying pressure on the black position in that variation. If the knight moves, then queen takes c5. So if the rook moved there, then bishop f6, and then if knight takes f6 again, queen takes c5. So there's annoying pressure here. So black actually didn't want to play knight takes d5 to allow queen takes d5. He played actually rook ad8, and now we see this rook shift to the c file. Okay. So again, annoying pressure, annoying threats, like bishop f6, and if knight takes, then there's rook takes c5. So what did black do? He got the bishop out of trouble there by playing bishop e7. But unfortunately, the weakness of this last move is revealed now, that there's a serious entry point with tempo, namely c6 now, which is seized by Mikhal. He plays rook c6. The queen moves, but there's a latent horrible thing which was accumulated, a trump card from earlier, which comes into play now as if by magic. So after bishop d2, the queen is running out of squares here, actually. Queen a4 seems as though the queen's getting in trouble almost. So actually b4 was used to guard the queen, but now comes out of the blue a tactic made available from the earlier operations with that surprising c4 move. So I wonder if you can guess it if you're not looking at the score sheet. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now, can you guess the next move Mikhal played? So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay. Anyone? Anyone want to speculate what was played here? Or okay. Particularly on live stream because you can't see the score sheet. But okay, anyone? All right, now I'll reveal it. Okay. Bishop takes f7. Look at what Mikhal had done magically behind the scenes in the lead up to this bishop f7. There's no d5 available to black. And you might ask, why isn't there a d5 on this diagonal? This diagonal has been totally exposed. There's no d5 defense here. Now, you might think king g6 actually is possible if you don't want to play king f8. And that is worth actually checking out how this would be refutable. It looks pretty dangerous. Knight h4 check looks pretty dangerous, dragging the king out. So because of that, I think the black king's probably getting mated here anyway by absolute force. And I leave it to you to sort of tell me after this specific, or if we played one more move. I think it's actually queen f7, and it looks as though the black king's not going to last much longer here. So in the game, the king went to f8. And also, with this move, black actually resigned. He resigned without waiting for Tahl's move, it seems, from the evidence. And if Tahl is to move here, then knight g5. And how on earth does black defend f7? It looks very bad here. You might consider knight d5. So what would be the refutation of knight d5? Probably just taking the knight is good here. And if bishop takes, then we've got bishop take. We're just a piece up for nothing. Or no, not a piece up. It just looks to be a crushing advantage here. If the rook moves, it can't go to c8. Say it moved over there. This looks like a crushing position anyway now. Something like rook c7 and queen f3. So black really felt his king safety has been shot to pieces here. But let's go back to see how that scene was set for the tactical combination again. Just let's review that. So just from an ordinary Royalopez initially, very bog standard moves and a bog standard knight retreat, we get this surprise little move, which seems perhaps a little bit strange, c4. But I believe this is knocking out, it's clearing out the diagonal. Because you can imagine if c6 and d5 were possible as resources, this thing wouldn't exist later with such impact. So c5 started to clear out the diagonal, making way for this bishop f7 later. So I think that's the neat thing about this game, the preparation beforehand. That it comes out of the blue almost, bang, bishop takes f7. Klebnik's writes, why not c3, bishop c7 to g4 instead of castles for black? So after c3, you're saying bishop g4. Is that, I don't know what theory, it must be in theory here, at move 8. This must be theory to castle, surely. I don't know if anyone knows the theory, but bishop g4 might be playable. I'm not sure if there's any cheapo. It doesn't look as though there's a cheapo. But often the bishop's like needed on the queen side. I don't know. It's quite committal to go to g4. Okay, we'll go on to another Tahl game now. Okay, did anyone? I hope someone got anything from that first game. I've got a few games to check out. So we'll go and look at another one now. So that was a bit of a pouncing tactic. Okay, so this one is against Alexander Koblenz, Riga, 1961. So e4, a Sicilian defense, and White plays this kind of Richter Rouser kind of move, bishop g5. But now the bishop's actually supported with f4, and this is often useful in sometimes to protect this bishop. But not only that, it's not only protecting the bishop. You know, f5 is often useful if the bishop's here, for example, or e5 if the bishop's here. You know, to get the bishop scope out. But there's also an implication of e5 if the queen's here. Then this queen's extended in scope. So these breaks with f5 and e5. Have to make black quite cautious. Black plays bishop e7, and then we see queen f3. So the break with e5 is going to cause black worry, especially this thematic idea is going to be rudely interrupted sometimes with e5. Queen c7, which means that if b5 e5, there's going to be bishop b7, or so you'd think, to counterattack against the queen from that, you know, attacking the rook. White castles queenside, very exciting, kind of juicy attacking position, which I'm sure many of us enjoy sort of playing from the white side of this. If you can remember this system, there are all sorts of systems to play against the Sicilian, and you know, some of you might be playing with the pawn on f3, but this has definitely got perks to play f4 and queen f3. A lot of perks, especially to do with this e5. So black plays knight bd7, and now a humble move, it seems. Where does this bishop belong? Does it actually belong on d3, where you might be able to play e5 and target h7 crudely later? Where does it belong? Strangely, maybe some of you might think Tahl played bishop e2. Okay. So bishop e2. The bishop's actually protecting the queen, and you might think big deal. There's no big deal to that. Surely protecting the queen. Well, there might be. Depends what sort of weird and wonderful combinations come later. Okay. So h6, and the bishop goes to h4, and now b5, and now actually a weird and wonderful combination is about to occur. So this bishop protecting the queen, another seemingly strange move, is shown to see its true potential here, because Mikhal plays e5. So this break is being used to attack the knight and the rook. But surely, you might ask, black just plays bishop b7 to repel the queen, and then can surely take on e5 to win a pawn, because black's got enough pieces on that e5. But here is the shocker. White just takes on f6, so it's a queen sack at the moment for just one knight. Bishop takes f3. Okay, knight and bishop. But now bishop takes f3. Note that bishop was protecting the queen, which is now attacking the rook. So Mikhal has sacrificed two minor pieces worth 6 for the queen, which is worth 9 or 10. But he's attacking again 2 pieces. 2 pieces are under attack here. So that seemingly not very dangerous bishop e2 it's all working out like a jigsaw puzzle. That bishop e2 is actually fundamental to this e5 here. So it's going to be 3 pieces for the queen now. d5, so we get 3 pieces for the queen, or do we? Does Mikhal want to play f takes? No, he doesn't, because queen takes f4 will be check, winning the bishop. That's got to be avoided. What does Mikhal do? He plays knight takes e6. Amazing move. Not only attacking the queen, but defending f4 away from this check, giving white even greater material deficit, it seems. So at the moment, we're back to how much material for the queen and the piece has been sacrificed. Quite a bit. Check. Check. He's getting another piece back now. Check. King goes to g7. So let's do a material count actually. I've lost count myself. 5, 10, 13, 16, 19. Let's give the queen 10, 15, 20, 23. So it's like white's at least a piece down still. In this position he plays bishop g3. Okay, so leaving the bishop in pre, because if king takes then there's f5 check, winning the queen. So what's the real danger here facing black? Well, there's also e8 if he wants to win an exchange. But the real danger is, I think, his king, really, after f5 and the centre collapsing. Black plays knight f6. And now this rook he1 is calmly played. Okay, so if white can get in rook takes e6, then there's a lot of dangerous threats emerging, like f5 and bishop e5. b4 is played. And now another piece sack. This game is a bit crazy, really. Rook takes e6, giving up another piece. But now f5, exposing an attack on the queen. The queen can't go there, the rook's on b6, so it goes to b7, threatening mate in 1. So that's parried. So we have here a position where white is like a queen for a minor piece down. He's like -5 materially. But the thing is, black is faced with an ominous threat here of bishop e5. How does he defend against bishop e5 now? Because that pawn is also stopping any defensive resource on the pawn knight on f6. So this pawn isn't being used to queen, it's being used to control that key f8 square here. And the black king is sitting to be slaughtered. If the knight wasn't around, then bishop e5 would be slaughter time for the king. Well, black tried here queen d7, preparing to do a queen sack in return to get rid of white's attack rather. So after bishop e5, he plays queen takes e6, just trying to extinguish off and win, the other bishop with his king, which would be carnivorous here. So that seems like a fair deal. But Mikhal, a rook down here, still magically has the pressure. These double pawns are actually quite useful in this position. And after rook f1, still a lot of pressure to deal with. The knight goes to h7, and white starts to regain material. He takes on h8. And now a piece down, but tactically another little combinatory blow here gives white, believe it or not, a transition into an easily won king and pawn ending after all that. He plays rook f8. So if knight takes f8, then queen with check. So rook takes, and now e takes, knight takes, and unfortunately for black, e7 is winning back the knight. Black has to defend the knight to stop the pawn queening. So Mikhal just takes, and after king d1 it becomes evident, of course, that black has a lost king and pawn ending. 2-1 pawn majority here. The king just marches over here and wins d5. And there's also a pawn majority here, 2-1. So after all that, a winning king and pawn ending. Very strange game. Very complex. Queen sacrifice from early on. Seemingly strange bishop move, supporting the queen. But the whole idea was to play this e5, which was often a common theme in many Sicilian games in this line, that the idea is you can rely often on black trying to play the bog standard b5 and bishop b7, but black is revealing the knight as a sort of piece to be attacked on the diagonal. So the interesting build up here is how this queen on f3 was actually innocently defended in this. If we look at early on, the evidence now, bishop e2. Who would have thought bishop e2? Protecting the queen, preparing this queen sack later. So the initial queen sack for one piece, no pieces, one piece again, queen for one piece at the moment. But black is faced with serious, like, menacing threats here. So f5, f takes, f5 basically is particularly dangerous. e8, also just rook e1 takes e6 and e8. There are numerous threats to deal with in this position. So black tried knight f6 and just started crumbling, actually, even after winning a piece here on c3. So basically, you know, what has white got for the queen? Just one minor piece here. But even so, white has huge pressure now on f6, which has to be dealt with. It was dealt with this counter queen sack, which didn't quite work out, because white was still kind of winning with another little combination here to transition into a winning king and pawn ending. That is kind of a magical game, really, from the opening. I hope you got something out of that one. Okay, so let's go on to another. So that was against Koblenz. So we'll go on to another now with Mikhal playing black. Okay, flip the board. So this is what I like to see, King's Indians actually. It's a King's Indian from Mikhal. So the King's Indian, it wasn't just Fischer or Kasparov, it was Tahl as well playing the King's Indian defence. So this is the 4 pawns attack, a very violent continuation for white. So this c5 is a very popular move, the most popular trodden path. And then try and break up the white centre. Often bishop g4 is also a move. To play bishop g4 to pin the knight and put more pressure on the dark squares. But actually this early, I've managed to get rid of the score sheet. I have to paste the score sheet again, pardon me. Okay, let's go back. Sorry, King's Indian. So c5 and then an early e6, breaking wide open the centre. So after bishop e2, e takes d5, and e takes d5. How is this punished? E takes d5. Usually white would take with c takes d5. That would be the usual response, and white has to put up with right pressure on e4. So he didn't fancy that. He didn't fancy giving Mikhal the target on e4. So this is kind of looking like a strange continuation. E takes d5. Okay, Toshin writes about bishop g4 being a pseudo-active move. I think it's just theory, bishop g4. I played this King's Indian defence, and bishop g4 I think is theory. But maybe e6 is also a theoretical alternative as well. It seems black's doing okay here after e takes d5. So black traditionally gets counterplay, and Kasparov has played moves like this next move now to get more counterplay out of the King's Indian with this pawn sack b5, sort of mixing Benko Gambit ideas. So if c takes b, maybe a6, literally like a Benko Gambit, but an improved Benko Gambit. So white actually took with his knight. He's taking some control, of course, at the moment, away from e4. Now black, it seems, proceeds to really overprotect, in Nimzovich style, the e4 square, actually, quite amazingly. There's a great visual impression that I have of this now, what happens on e4. Have a look at how black coordinates all pieces now on e4. Even a6 plays a role in e4, because this rook is going to go like this to e4. We're going to see that now. The knight can't go here at the moment because bishop takes c3 might be good, or knight takes c3. So it goes to a3. Now rook a7. So starting the overprotection of e4. Coordinate all the pieces on a strong central square, and they'll all be coordinated and powerful. So that's the basis of overprotection. So rook e7, rook fe8. So black's got nice pieces, nice teamwork, nice bishops. This knight could do with being improved, though. Why not come and join in the e4 overprotection? That's what it does. Knight d7, and now knight df6. Now it's from this position Mikhal can start to think about going on to a more direct attack, and in fact he does so now. The luxury of e4 being overprotected is that one piece can be moved away now, and this reveals things like bishop d4, knight f4. So white has to defend in particular f4 now. He plays g3 to protect the f4 pawn. And it's a big decision usually to give up the precious dark square bishop, because often, you're weakening the dark squares. But here, with this pawn on f4, how can white gain access to these dark squares? It's more difficult. So the sort of controversial looking move now is played to give up the dark square bishop, bishop d4, offering it up on a plate, and it is taken. But what's happened with this transaction here? Slightly weakened king's field for white, perhaps. And in fact, this is pounced on now in conjunction with this rook battery on e1. Black plays a very pouncing tactical move right in this position, actually. He plays knight g5, so revealing an attack on e1, and he's going to play a Zwischenzug check here. After rook takes e7, he plays the Zwischenzug check, and now he takes on e7. And look at black's pieces, very, very nice, aggressive pieces, and the queen can even come back here. The bishop's got entry points. It's all working out well. This pawn is kind of dislocating for white, keeping control of a key square. This bishop's kind of impotent behind its own pawn at the moment. So bishop d2. Now the knight comes back to the centre. Or is it? It's not just about e4, it's about g4 to e3 now. The e3 square, pardon, wrong arrows, whoops, e3. So knight h4, knight g4, e3, and also h2 is a problem. So the knight actually stumbles back. Maybe knight h4 wasn't the best just played. The knight stumbles back to protect h2 now. Then comes rook e3, celebrating the fact that the queen and king are not ideally placed if there was a knight fork. So the bishop cannot take on e3. Pressure on these points d3 and f3 now. King g2. Not really attacking the knight here, because there's always a discovered attack with check to win d3. So that's not really a threat. Given that is the case, Mikhal plays queen e7. And this introduces the idea of this check on e2 actually, which needs to be parried, because that would be quite crushing. So white parries rook e2 by playing rook e1. But now comes some devastation from Mikhal. He sacrifices a piece now, a knight. trademark sort of knight sack to rip apart opponent's kings. So the knight sack, what does it do? Rook takes e1, limited choices from white. If bishop takes e1, then knight e3 check will win the queen again. So knight takes e1. Unfortunately, the weakness of the last move is the h4 square. There's an open invitation for queen h4 now, which is used up. Queen h4, hitting h2 and f2. Okay. This looks fairly dangerous for white. There are probably different defensive possibilities which need to be examined, but knight f3 is no good because of queen f2. What does white do? He played actually bishop c1, protecting f2 laterally with his queen. So it seems is the worst over. So he's got an eye on knight e3 he can take. He's got an eye on f2. Where's the bolt from the blue now? Well, actually, this move unfortunately left the knight in pre. So queen takes e1. Ouch. And this looks pretty grim now, because black isn't even a piece down and he's got a raging attack going still here. This is very bad news. h3 is trying to evict the knight. It just goes back to h6. This bishop's still impotent behind its own pawn, and black can even carry out strategic exchange if he wants to get rid of white's better bishop. So white tries f5, but it's a really terrible position. Knight takes f5. There's horrible threats like queen g3 now. Bishop f4 against queen g3 perhaps, but now comes check. Check. And now another crushing blow. Bishop takes h3 check. Ouch. Because if king takes, there will be check, and knight e1 check is really embarrassing with the horrible fork. So that can't really be taken there. So instead king takes f3, but now a really crushing and incisive move. By the way, many of these moves are Houdini approved. I've checked these games earlier. Many of them Houdini finds, and this one's no exception. Accurate move here. Piece down, very accurate move. Queen g1. Threat now of bishop g4 mate, because the queen is cutting off e3 here and f2. That horrible threat there of bishop g4. White's in a sort of desperate situation here. Sorry, actually the king's got e4 to be fair. It's not nearly it's not quite mate, but it's pretty dangerous. Bishop takes g6 was played, which looks totally like desperate. But there was another serious threat of queen g4, and that one is used. Queen g4 after bishop g6. Queen g4 check is used, picking up a whole bishop, and black is a whole bishop up now. End of game. No need to make the white king anymore. It's just a whole bishop up. White was really just beaten up there on the king side, and it all kicked off with this pawn sack. If we review this game, which led to a kind of accelerated overprotection. I don't know if we can describe it as that, an accelerated overprotection strategy of e4. So once white had moved his pawn away from e4, Mikhal maybe was attracted a lot to e4 here, and this b5 conception takes the white knight away from c3, it seems, and black starts building up loads of pressure on e4. Loads and loads of pressure on e4 as a basis for a vicious attack now, and giving up what is usually like the precious dark square bishop. But it seems the knights are able to probe into the weaknesses of white's king here. So knight g5, and the knights get quite entrenched here on the king side, and now reroute back to go forward again. So knight g4. Now the rook invades with rook e3. and it starts to get kind of nasty soon now with one of the knights being sacrificed, and it becomes indefensible very quickly. So here white's giving back a piece. He thinks that's the best defense, to give back a piece, and now it's just totally grim, this position anyway. Even so, Mikhal carries on in a devastating manner, sacrificing more to get even more advantage, and white gets desperate here. Actually, forget bishop g4. That's not a mating threat. The key threat is actually queen g4 check, king f2, and winning the dark square bishop. These threats are probably far too much to deal with, but there is also maybe a quiet threat of f5 and then bishop g4 mate if e4 can be sealed off. So there's multiple threats black has here, hence probably white's seemingly desperate move, bishop takes g6. Okay, so again, just the pressure overload there from an initial pawn sacrifice, huge pressure exerted on white. Okay, hope you got something from that game. Shall we go on? As white now, Mikhal against Lutikov. I hope I can play like this in my 5-minute chess soon. King's Indian. That's quite inspiring actually, as a King's Indian player, to see a kind of accelerated overprotection like that. Okay. So against Lutikov, so Tallinn 1964. So e4, e5. And we have here the elephant gambit being totally destroyed. So someone was cheeky enough to play the elephant gambit against Mikhal Tahl. So I use the elephant gambit a lot in bullet chess or 2-minute chess on ChessCube, and someone's actually been playing it, believe it or not, against Mikhal Tahl. So what does Mikhal Tahl do against this dreaded elephant gambit? I shouldn't really show you this. Anyone on ChessCube, please ignore this section. Yeah, if you're playing me in the elephant gambit. So e takes d5, e4. Okay. Maybe e4 is already a mistake. I think bishop d6 might be more recommendable, because e4 is running into this dangerous possibility of queen e2, which not only attacks the pawn, but also queen b5 might be potentially annoying as a check. So the pawn is supported, and now it's undermined again with d3. It's supported again, it's undermined again, it's attacked again. So black has limited choices here to try and protect his e4 pawn. Bishop b4 now, which unfortunately does run into queen b5 check. So white is able to get the dark square bishop, but fortunately for black, he was attacking the knight. So after c6, it seems like a fairly equal transaction, but it's in white's favour really. He's got the bishop pair, he's got an important dark square bishop, and if he moves that, he can castle queenside and put even more pressure on black. So I think white has an advantage here. Poor elephant gambit player, novel opening, but not too much dynamism here for black. It seems all the dynamism is now with white. All this frontal pressure on the d pawn. That's that d pawn, queen's pawn. Knight c6, and the queen acts as a bishop on this diagonal. It stays on the diagonal, cutting off the king, stopping the king from castling. Bishop e6. And maybe just g takes is enough, but Mikhal plays bishop c4, putting even more pressure on d5 immediately. Queen e7, and now he snaps up that d5 pawn, not minding seemingly the exchange of queens, but actually he hasn't just plotted the exchange of queens here. It's more brilliant than that. It's as brilliant as sunlight. So knight c7 check. He's leaving his queen and pre here. He just plays rook he1 rather casually, leaving the recapture to lesser like mortals. So what's going on here? He wants to win e6 and he wants to sort of chase down the black king. The queen goes to c5. Engines don't like that move, giving actually queen a5 as maybe a way to survive this position. So maybe there was a way to survive this position, but it's difficult to find sometimes against Mikhal, as many of his opponents discovered. So now white starts mopping down the defences. So the bishop goes, and now the defensive knight goes, and we have these raking bishops, which is a common theme in Tahl games, against the black king. Takes, but actually bishop h6 is not needed here. There's something even better. Poor king and queen, like the previous game we just saw, they're forked here. Knight e6 check. White's regaining some material. Regains the queen. Okay, check, check, check. Knight takes b7 check. And now bishop d5. So bishop d5 also defends against fg, which might have been a problem for the pawn queening. So that's handled, as well as defending its attacking. The knight moves, attacking the bishop. Tahl doesn't mind being exchanged down here. After all, he's got 3 pawns for being exchanged down after bishop takes f3. 3 pawns for the exchange is adequate. Rook a8, trying to get rid of the rooks. And Mikhal doesn't mind. Knight c5. And if rook takes, then winning another pawn actually with check. Winning this pawn. So black's really got a lost position here. He plays this check here. And in fact, white improves on knight takes g5. He doesn't have to play knight g5. He can trap this knight now. He plays knight c5. Check. Because he wants to try and trap the knight, which has got b4 access. He deprives it of b4 by playing knight d3. And the carnivorous king will munch that knight now. So here, black resigned. He's material down. So the elephant gambit against Mikhal didn't create the dynamism one would hope for from a gambit. Let's have a look at that again. I think the overly committal pawn move e4 might sometimes work against inferior moves like knight d4. Black would get a good game, you know, like this. I've played the black side of this. This would be fine. You'd look forward to stuff. There'll be stuff to look forward to. But no, the way Mikhal plays it is horrible for the black player here. He plays queen e2. He keeps undermining e4. Keeps undermining. And this horrible check, not minding this e takes f3 at the end of it. He's picking up the dark square bishop because he's also castling queenside. All the pressure is on black. From the gambit, white has all the dynamism. That's not supposed to be the case. And this leads now to a spectacular queen sacrifice. So not only he won the opening battle, but he's trying to crown it with a brilliant middle game. So he doesn't just automatically recapture the queen. He goes on the king hunt, which is very quickly rewarded actually, because he wins back the queen very soon after this vacating move. Rook takes e6, vacating e6 for the knight fork. So check, and even though the exchange down, he's got loads of pawns for the exchange. The one tactical issue to deal with is dealt with elegantly with this bishop d5 actually. Against fg and g1 it's defended, and he's defending b7. So another kind of tactical tragedy for the opponent, culminating in also losing the knight. Okay. So as an elephant gambit player, I'm tempted now to try bishop d6 instead of e4. e4 is a bit of a gamble really, if you play e4 in elephant gambit line. So let's have a look at another game. I hope you guys got something from that game. So against John van der Wiel in the Weekend's 1982 tournament. Okay, let's have a look at this. C4, English opening. wide diversity in openings. Knight c3 and bishop b4. This isn't quite Nimzo-Indian territory. White could transpose into Nimzo-Indian if he played d4. Instead, white plays e4, and maybe this is already a blunder from black. The weakness of the last move in the opening, as early as move 3, you wouldn't expect at GM level, but there is a weakness of the last move. That d6 was just weakened, and it's pounced on now, literally by pouncing knight actually. Knight b5, the pouncing knight exploits the weakness of the last move. There's a horrible threat of knight d6, so a natural move now is interfered with knight d6 check. How does black handle that? Well, he plays actually knight c6, inviting the check. But there's more punishments handed out here, because this might give black a dynamic position. Check, takes, black would have development. The king wouldn't be so bad, or maybe it can even go to f8. But no, the bishop's also offside. It's away from g7. So look at this diagonal. How do we target g7 here? We might also consider queen g4 as a move at some point. Mikhal plays a3 and now b4 to accelerate bishop b2 to target g7. CB, bishop b2. Lots of pressure on black already, straight from the bat, from the opening. All the pressure on black, all the pressure on the opponent. Dynamism goes one way in Mikhal Tahl games. Even if you play a Gambit against Mikhal Tahl, you'll still be faced with all the pressure, it seems. But here Mikhal's playing the Gambit as usual. So e5. So for his pawn, he's now marking out d6. He has blocked in his own bishop, you could argue. But this knight is being cramped now by this pawn. It hasn't got easy access to f6. So it goes to e7 instead. Now white overprotects like e5. Maybe you could call this again accelerated overprotection, maybe new term, accelerated overprotection of e5 as a basis for an attack. So knight d6. And now, not minding the advanced knight being taken, he's liberating the bishop across this diagonal, which has been a theme of my recent YouTube videos. The bishop has a clear-cut scope across the entire diagonal. But the pawn might be vulnerable. But is black in a position to try and win this pawn here? No. What's this bishop doing on a5? Now b takes a3 is chosen as a move for some reason, giving the white rook access to position potentially. So rook takes a3. The point is revealed though. Bishop b4, full king, a3 and d6 to win back that d6 pawn. If black can grab the centre, take the pawn, move the bishop back and play d5, black might be having a good position. The pawn's protected though with rook d3 here. Not only that, there's more bad news. Queen a1's now possible to put more pressure on the diagonal. So bishop c5, but for the moment Mikhal castles, laughing at black not being able to castle. a5 and now queen a1, putting pressure on g7, causing another concession to have to defend g7. So namely f6. Now this diagonal is emphasized with this next move, and also the rook's ability to switch across if needed, because Mikhal plays knight g5. So he wants to really extend the scope of that bishop, a theme in many of my recent YouTube videos over the last 2 days. This bishop is lethal across the diagonal. Knight g5. Emphasize the bishop. If it's taken, then bishop takes g7 and take the rook at the very least, or even switch the rook across, or even bishop h5 might be mating in some lines if king f7. So e5, trying to blunt the bishop, blunt the whole diagonal, but now it's needs to be undermined. How would you undermine e5? You play f4. It's a legal move at the moment. Pawn's pinned, so what does Mikhal do? He plays king h1. He wants to play f4 just to rip open this diagonal and this file. Black's pieces are not really helping over here, especially this bishop. So bishop d4, f4, So black tries to maintain d4 control at the very least, and he's putting pressure on b2 now, and he wants Mikhal to play bishop d4, but no, Mikhal refuses. He just plays bishop c3, because maybe now rook b1 and rook b5 will be annoying. So black actually plays bishop takes c3, and now we see queen takes c3. A lot of pressure, immediate threat, f takes, knight takes, queen e5, pin. So king g8 getting out of that. But f takes e5 anyway. Knight takes e5. Now, we see knight e4 offering not just an exchange sack, but potentially there's going to be a sack on f6 pretty soon. And also, not only that, c5 is supported by the knight, and maybe this bishop can come to the diagonal. Various ideas. After h5, in fact, knight takes f6 is chosen, and black resigns here. It looks fairly miserable, this position. So let's try and work out why black resigned. If he takes, we have check, and if knight g4, then queen takes f6 looks quite crushing. Numerous threats. And if king h7, then queen c2 is mating. Because if king h6... Nope, pardon me. Sorry, rook takes f6. Pardon me. The queen is helping the mating there here. Rook takes f6. So that's a really crushing piece sack. And if the king marched back on the f file, then of course queen takes e5. So total obliteration with these pieces just unable to get in the game. Really embarrassed the spectator pieces there. We also saw the blasting of the diagonal as an instructive theme there. Let's have a look in review of this game. So from the English opening, seemingly innocent move c5, which usually is a logical punishment. If white plays c4 and e4, he's weakening d4, so you might think c5's good. Just to mark out d4. Black usually ends up getting a nice game. But here it was all drastically punished with the unusual, non-stereotypical move, knight b5. And it all started to go quite badly downhill, actually. Even the poor bishop was picked on as a tempo gainer for this diagonal, if you think about it. So a3, b4, tempo gain for the diagonal, temporarily blocking in his own bishop. But now the bishop's unblocked, and he's left with persistent pressure on the diagonal and a vacated a1 square. And it's all downhill now after this f6. Black desperately trying to block up the diagonal, but it's easily underminable here. As soon as white plays for king h1 and f4, black's just falling apart. There's no real defensive resources here to match white's attacking resources. Black is just falling apart after knight e4. This threat of knight f6 is impossible to deal with, it would seem, but there's also other threats like c5 and a to bishop c4s. So black resigned here. So a crushing game there. Right. How long has it been? It's been about 59 minutes so far. Now if you really want, I can extend this session to be slightly over an hour. Does anyone want to look at one more game? And then I'm done. I did have one more game in reserve to have a look at against Tony Moles. Player writes, have you heard the theory that Tahl changed his style during the second half of his career to become a solid, safer player? Maybe that was that health issues or something? Possibly health issues? Not sure. But the dynamism's all in his games, you know. He's always playing gambits, even if the opponent plays gambits, he's always getting pressure. So maybe he's influenced greatly, you know, Kasparov actually. His style of play seems evident in Kasparov games. We can have a look at one more game. My head temperature has gone quite significantly up but I don't know if you can cope with one more game. I'll try and cope with one more game. Okay, this is quite a crush of, I think, one of the UK's earliest, first grandmasters, or is it the second? Who came first, Raymond Keane or Tony Miles? Quiz question: who was the first UK grandmaster? Does anyone know? Excuse my ignorance. Is Tony Miles the second after Raymond Keane, or the first? Tony Miles passed away, unfortunately, a bit before his time, but he was a brilliant player in his own right. Very innovative. Once beat Anatoly Karpov with black, with a6 and b5. So Tony Miles as black in a tournament in Germany, actually, which is appropriate for chess base, 1982. The Pools tournament, Germany, 1982. Okay. So e4, and seemingly rock solid. It has a rock solid reputation, the Caro-Kann. So it's always great to see it bashed up. So knight c3, d takes e4, and black plays the ultra solid, the ultra boring knight d7, favoured a lot by Karpov to sort of try and easily draw with Kasparov in many games. Just preparing knight f6 and to be able to recapture without any structural damage. Forget all the fancy stuff with the early knight f6, which would allow, either it takes or that. No, black wants to maintain a solid pawn structure. So what does white do here? Does white really want to already exchange one set of minor pieces? Now, many of us would consider this move perhaps not that great for some key reasons. That the knight retreat to g3, okay, although preserving more pieces, does have some downside sometimes. Taking on f6 would secure sometimes white a comfortable edge. White castles try and make use of e5, plays c3, and sometimes that's a comfortable edge. The knight here is sometimes a bit tricky to make use of. e6 is played, now bishop d3, bishop e7. It all seems fairly dead solid for black so far. I think most of you would agree. Looks dead solid, boring for black. Black could try and draw this perhaps. Solid choice against Mikhal. Tahl, good from a psychological point of view. Avoid getting hacked to bits, you would think. At the time of this game, Mikhal was 2605 actually in 1982. Still a very high FIDE rating. So Miles is a bit lower at 2575. Player right, sorry, Tony Miles was the first British GM, slightly before Keane, right? Yeah, thank you for that. Okay. So both sides now castle. And a seemingly logical move. I've played this many times in French defences. Just b6 to just try and get this bishop going on the diagonal. It's seemingly logical. c4, which carries some bite to it. Maybe d5 is going to be a pain later. Maybe this bishop can go like this and then d5. Okay, bishop b7. In fact, the bishop goes to f4 here. So cutting out any queen c7s from black, which might have been comfortable to play queen c7. Okay, rook. And that's one perk actually of the knight on g3, because look, there's no knight h5 here. The knight's doing something to prevent the bishop being attacked. There's no knight h5. So a little side note on knight g3 there. Rook e8. Rook ad1. So we have this ominous strategic break in the centre coming up. But black gets in his strategic break first, liberating the scope of the bishop across this diagonal. Seems like a logical idea. There's a downside to this thematic break sometimes. And it comes in the form of d takes c5, and this is across many opening variations, d takes c5, because white in practice gets pressure on the d file, which is uncomfortable, and the e5 square is also sometimes emphasized a bit more as a useful outpost square. Here black cannot do knight takes c5 because bishop takes h7 check, winning the queen. Bishop takes c5 might also be a bit uncomfortable to play for various reasons, like not bishop d6, pardon me. but maybe bishop g5 or knight e5. So actually Tony decided to try and maintain a pawn near the center. He dared to play b takes c5, which might promise black some further opportunities like queen b6, maybe when the bishop's not there, rook b8 later, b file pressure, bit of dynamism perhaps associated with b takes c5. Also the queen could come out to a5. So this b takes c5 does seem to have some perks with it. What's the downside? Well, knight e5 is played, and there's horrible threats brewing here to do with d7 and h7 and f7. These three guys, in fact. So black uses the perk of c5, liberating that queen. He plays actually the move queen b6, and now comes punishment already. Bishop takes h7 check. The knight, the weakness of the last move. The queen was protecting d7. Look at d7 now. It looks like a big blunder from black, doesn't it? This queen b6. Why allow bishop h7? I think there was pressure on black here, and he's starting to get a bit panicky. I don't know if black would be so easily busted with, say, queen c8, but on the other hand, queen c8 doesn't really promise as much as queen b6. But also you can imagine the knight f7 being dangerous for this sort of thing, for e6 crumbling. So I don't know, queen b6, and we saw bishop takes h7 check, knight takes, and now rook takes d7. So white looks to have lots of pressure here and doing very well. Okay, black plays g6 here. Okay, g6. Now b4 is played. So what on earth is going on here? If c takes b, then maybe c5 is dangerous here, because if queen takes, then rook takes, and if bishop takes, then rook takes here. So b4 is a bit of a nasty blow actually. Bishop c8 is a clear blunder. I was checking this earlier with Houdini. This is a clear blunder move. There were better moves than this. So black really goes badly downhill now after bishop c8. Mikhal, he takes on c5. And now if bishop takes, then again we have this rook takes f7 at the very least. So queen takes c5 unfortunately has a bad problem with it. White can gain a tempo using that knight. Horrible knight springs into action now. Knight e4. Attacking the queen. The queen moves to b6. And now the rook refuses to move actually. The queen comes on the sensitive diagonal, queen f3, because also the bishop is, the rook's potentially attacked. But more significantly as well, f7, bishop e3 will be attacking the queen and threatening queen f7 mating. King moves knight g6 mating. So quite a few issues for black to deal with here. He plays queen b2. And now comes a really slicing move. Knight takes f7, just slicing through the black king safety. And you might think, well, the rook's hanging. Surely the rook's hanging. There's a big problem with taking the rook. Namely bishop e5, attacking the queen and supporting knight h6 mate. So say the queen moved, then knight h6 is mate. So a slight technical problem there with taking the rook. So black actually tried, he probably recognises he's completely busted here. He plays queen g7 and he doesn't last many moves as you'd expect after check. Now a simple casual move, not so brilliant, but just keeping the rook on, just rook c7. there's enough threats to be going on with, like knight d6, bishop e5 is a threat, because if takes, then there's knight f7 check, winning the queen. So after rook f8, in fact, this diagonal is played on, this lethal diagonal for the bishop is played on with rook takes e7, knocking out black's dark square bishop. Black resigned here actually. The continuation could be something nasty like check. Just winning the queen actually. The queen has to go in front unless black wants to lose the queen like this. Horrible. The knight stopping. So black's just losing tons of material, or there might even be worse. But this is sufficient to win. This is loads of material up. We'll just knight takes f6. It's just truly horrific actually. Knight takes f6. Anyway, so black resigned there after rook takes e7. So let's do a quick review and summary of this one. So how to hack up the seemingly solid Caro-Kann with a knight retreat, knight g3. So play for the thematic central break of d5. Pressure on d7, celebrated with bishop takes h7. Now this rook on the 7th, after bishop c8, black really went badly downhill now, as the rook is joined with other attacking bits and pieces. The queen and the knight are enough to probe f7 here. So knight takes f7, and if king takes, there was actually bishop e5 check, winning the queen. So it's all gone now really. This position's gone. King safety is being blown to pieces. So here rook takes e7, the final devastating blow, again emphasizing the lethal power often of the bishop striking across the diagonal. A constant theme in my recent YouTube videos actually. So check, well, it will just be totally like devastating here. So actually after rook takes e7, black resigned. Blimey, I hope you enjoyed this week. Gone slightly above the 1 hour time limit. Hope you got something from these games. I think I did. Dynamism, piece pressure, even if the opponent plays a gambit. Bishops across the diagonals, using central pawn breaks, using accelerated overprotection. These are all themes of this week's lecture, which I hope you got something from. Thanks very much. Comments or questions? I'll be here for the next 2 minutes. I'm going to stop recording now for the YouTube. It will be on YouTube tomorrow, by the way. And if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, here's a convenient link, by the way. So it's free and you'll be notified of any new videos if you use this link. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. And check out for this video on YouTube as well. So I'll upload it shortly after this broadcast. Thanks very much.